Shana Tova. In the beginning of God's creation, the world was confusion and chaos. Darkness spread over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God swept over the water. Genesis 1:1. That was a dark time, confusing, chaotic, with little to anchor reality and a fleeting sense of divine presence. Nothing had yet come to be from the darkness, and there was no clear sign of what was to come. We read those early verses of Genesis on Simchat Torah every year. At the beginning of this past year, 5784, they eerily reflected our reality. We had just made it through the joy of our first Rosh Hashanah together, the spiritual journey of Yom Kippur, and the warmth and lightness of Sukkot. Our early days of communal creation were complete, and now we were ready for the seventh day, for rest. But you know how this story goes. We were not, in fact, approaching a period of rest. Instead, we found ourselves in shock, confusion, and chaos on October 7th. Rather than rest, we experienced an international communal darkness so deep that we could not see what was to come. It has been a turbulent, trying year for the Jewish people. We have gone through cycles of grief and worry. There has also been dismay, anger, and horror at how peaceful Palestinians were caught in a war zone with nowhere to go. Jews have felt that grief too. And within the American Jewish community, we have felt alienated on college campuses, scrutinized and othered by the media, and threatened in our synagogues, schools, neighborhoods, and sometimes even our homes. Furthermore, amidst it all, we have navigated the personal challenges and losses that come with every year of living. We've lived many seasons of life this year. We made it through. And more than that, we had good times along the way as well. How? How did we endure and overcome? How did we find and create moments of light? In 6 days, God transformed chaos and darkness into plenitude and light, one step at a time. We, too, have the tools in our tradition to transform trauma into strength, pain into community. When we were faced with the traumas of the past year, how did we find and create moments of light? As God said, "Let there be light," and saw it was good, we too looked at the darkness and the chaos, and we created light. We lit yahrzeit candles, and we created a new ritual by lighting a yahrzeit candle with our Shabbat candles on that first dark Shabbat. We led interfaith Hanukkah candle lighting in South San Francisco City Hall, remember that? Which was a proud, joyful public display of our Jewishness and our unshaken commitment to interfaith work. And we did not only continue and add to old rituals, but we created new rituals entirely. At our community Seder, we added an empty place setting for the hostages. We draped the backgrounds with chains of yellow ribbons, which you can still see in the social hall. And we took wine out of our glass to show our sadness for Palestinian families who had lost innocent loved ones. The first tool that we use to address the darkness, both literally and figuratively, is ritual. Ritual, as Rabbi Cantor Hilary Chorney taught us at our community retreat last year, is a powerful spiritual tool that is more accessible to us than we often realize. In Jewish community, we make Jewish rituals, but rituals can be powerful outside of Jewish tradition too. Activist and minister Kathleen McTeague looks for 3 things in any practice or ritual: intention, attention, and repetition. It doesn't have to include God, and it doesn't have to have origins that are hundreds of years old. Casper de Kyle, author of Secular Spirituality, writes that ritual is all about setting an intention, paying attention to the present moment, and creating an action that you can repeat. And why bother? Because rituals make the invisible connections that make life meaningful visible. Our rituals this year were one of the things that carried us through. They created a container for our emotions, reflected our aspirations, and elevated our thoughts. As a spiritual tool, They created light. On the second day, God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate mayim lamayim, water from water." This expanse became the separation, the havdalah, between heavenly precipitation and the waves below. So God called the expanse shamayim, heaven. How does one touch the heavens? I love sitting by the window on airplanes. It's always my favorite seat, but somehow that view doesn't quite capture it. There's a difference between sky and heaven, between the physical and the spiritual. The clouds and the sunset are pretty, but I only feel swept up as if to heaven through music and moving prayer. The second tool our tradition has given us is prayer. And prayer is a tricky spiritual tool. People's experiences of prayer vary widely by their religious background, their beliefs about God, and the text of the prayer. Additionally, Jewish prayer is so firmly fixed that we often have to work to find modern meaning in ancient words. Sure, it sometimes comes easily, but don't take me for a fool. I know that some of you find services less than stimulating, and it's okay, I've been there, I get it. Somehow, prayer and music are innate to us as humans. It's hard to find a culture without some form of them. They are universal spiritual tools for good times and bad that have the potential to bring us to heaven's gates if we find the ways to connect with them. Prayer and music open us to the sudden feeling, as our forefather Jacob put it, that God is in this place and I did not know it. In Rabbi Jonathan Sack's commentary on that Jacob story, he writes, "Prayer is a ladder stretching from earth to heaven. On this ladder of words, thoughts, and emotions, we gradually leave Earth's gravitational field. We move from the earth around us, perceived by the senses, to an awareness of that which lies beyond the world." I would argue that the same is true for music. Prayer and music can be gratitude practice, catharsis, community builder, help us feel rooted by tradition, and can open up our hearts. Music lovers pour themselves into song and lyric. Similarly, in the Rosh Hashanah Haftarah, the priest Eli sees Hannah praying fervently with only her lips moving and mistakes her for being drunk. But Hannah answered and said, "No, my lord, I am a woman of pained spirit. I haven't drunk any wine or liquor, but I have been pouring out my soul to God." Just as the God of creation divided the waters above from the waters below, prayer and music are our spiritual water on earth, shared by our spiritual counterpart above. In the book of Isaiah, God says, "For as the rain or snow drops from heaven and returns not there, but soaks the earth and makes it bring forth vegetation, yielding seed for sowing and bread for eating, so too is the word that issues from my mouth," which brings us to the third day. On that third day, the newly minted earth sprouts plants that bear seeds and trees that bear fruit. A day of produce, of growing a world that can stand against darkness and chaos. The fruitful spiritual tool is Torah, the tree of life. The Torah I'm speaking of is not just the 5 books that we read every year, Genesis through Deuteronomy. It is all study of the rich Jewish text tradition. As Jews, we inherit a long discourse on how to live an ethical life. Engaging in that discourse and adding your voice is your right and privilege. Tikva is a community that loves learning. We had our retreat, our 16-part class on Judaism, weekly Torah study, and study in the Rosh Chodesh women's group. Why do we love studying so much? Because when you're studying a Jewish text, you're rarely just studying the text. You get challenged on how to be a better person. You develop bonds with your fellow scholars. And since we can never agree on anything in Judaism, you learn what healthy disagreement looks like, which is a critical skill in today's polarized culture. There's a Talmudic story about Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva, and elders hanging out in the loft of a house, debating whether study or action is more important. Rabbi Tarfon says, "Action is greater." Rabbi Akiva shoots back, "Study is greater." And then the rest of the rabbinic gang jumped in and said, "Study is greater because study leads to action." Study and action, the tree of Torah and the fruit it bears, the lantern and the path to walk on, the perfect pair. Day by day, we build our spiritual toolkit. So far, we have rituals, prayer and music, and study and action. I won't quiz you. On the fourth day of creation, God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years." Now, according to Jewish tradition, it has been 5,785 years, which is over 2 million days. But we do not only follow the cycles of the sun. The moon sets our months and thus our holidays. The Jewish calendar is a spiritual tool unto itself. In 2 different classes this year, I recommended Abigail Pogrebin's book, My Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew. Pogrebin sets out to observe every single holiday on the Jewish calendar, the ones we know, like Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat, and the ones we often don't, like the 10th of Tevet. At the end of it all, she writes, "I am moved more than anything by what our tradition imposes. Moments of deliberate intermission, the demand to reach others in trouble, the rope pulling the ancient into the present. I felt carried through the year on a sort of insistent current that conveys all boats to the same port at the same time. That sense of being inseparable, interdependent. We all showed up together. We all slowed down together. The small stuff in the rest of my non-religious life got sweeter," she says. "I marked more, paid attention. I lingered." Let us linger in our holidays starting tonight. Holidays reconnect us to our values. They mark periods of our years and our lives. They take a day and turn it into a point of presence. Day 5 is the stuff of fairy tales. Swarms of bugs, huge sea monsters, armies of birds, and God loves it. With the joy of a toddler, God cries, "More! Fill the waters and the seas. Let the birds increase. Be fruitful and multiply." God wants more sea monsters? That's the kind of story you remember. Jewish memory is an underappreciated spiritual resource. It can bring us warmth and joy, and we balance our joyful times with harder memories. Holidays have Yizkor services. Weddings have the glass breaking. We remember that we've been through hard times before, and not only have we survived them, but we've found meaning in them. The late historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, Zichrono Livracha, noted that the root for remember, zachar, is used 169 times in Torah. And almost as often as the Israelites are commanded to remember, they are also commanded to never forget. Yerushalmi writes, "The injunction to remember is felt as a religious imperative to an entire people." Abigail Pogrebin felt this too. She wrote, "I understood why Judaism mandates not just eulogy, but memory. Animate the story. It's not enough to retell it. We don't just recall Egypt or the temples. We resuscitate our enemies and bring back our heroes. I get this now," she says, "that memory is history, a corrective, and a badge. No Jew starts from scratch." Memory is built into our prayers, our holidays, and our rituals. As we enter each new day, whether we welcome each week with open arms or brace ourselves for it, our history gives us perspective and purpose. It helps us remember that we are not alone. We have a people, and that people's innumerable experiences behind us. No Jew starts from scratch. The community that we inherit might be our most precious spiritual tool of all. Being connected to community helps to insulate us from isolation, a feeling that has grown over the last few decades in American society. It also seems that many in the Jewish community have experienced the recent rise in anti-Semitism as social isolation and loneliness, in addition to fear and pain. But we are not alone. Look at all of us here tonight. We are not alone tonight, and we've never been alone. On the 6th day of creation, God said, "Let us make humankind in our image after our likeness." They shall have responsibility for the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, and the whole earth. And God created humankind in the divine image, creating a matched pair together. And God blessed them. Adam and Eve were created to be a community for each other, as well as to start a community in the world. That was their greatest blessing. Community is the fertile ground from which hope and resilience grow. We do not have community created for us like Adam and Eve. We must work to create it because the natural flow of our lives pulls us apart more than together. I am so grateful for Am Tikva's many, many leaders who fight the tide to create community here. It's a countercultural project, and it's worth it. It is a sacred task and a powerful spiritual tool. With the 6 days of creation, our 6-piece spiritual toolbox is complete. Embracing rituals, opening up through prayer and music, studying Jewish text, living in the rhythm of the calendar, preserving and transmitting memory and history, and connecting to community. In a sense, nothing has changed. I've seen us engage with all of these over the course of the year, but I want us to remember them, continue reaching for them, and perhaps expand beyond the 1 or 2 that are most familiar and comfortable. This year might not be any easier than last year, but we can move forward together knowing that we have the tools to not only survive, but to create love, joy, and blessing. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the Midrash of Genesis Rabbah, the rabbis question why creation started with the letter Bet, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, rather than Aleph, the first. One of their answers is that Aleph is for Arira, a curse, whereas Bet is for Bracha, a blessing. This world, however dark or chaotic, was created for blessing. Today, on Rosh Hashanah, the mythical birthday of creation, we celebrate that blessing and all the blessings that flow from it. As the Talmud says, may we leave behind last year with its curses and create blessings for the year to come. Shana Tova.